Hi, everybody, and welcome. We are so delighted to have you here with us this evening. I'm Judith Silverman Hodara. I'm a founder and director at Fortuna Admissions, and really excited to have three wonderful colleagues with me tonight. One of them is joining us right now. I'm going to start on my upper left-hand corner. Sahala, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sahala David. I am a founder and CEO of Great Revenue Sales Consulting Firm. And along with that, I'm a Fortuna coach for MIT Sloan, which is my alma mater.
Great. We're glad you're here. And welcome, Michael Malone.
Hey, Judith. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me this evening. I have been with Fortuna for a little bit now and have loved working with candidates to figure out sort of short and long-term planning. I have more of a career coach background, but worked oversaw admissions at Columbia, and also served as the managing director for careers at Kellogg. So hoping to be able to share a little bit of insight on each of those institutions for you tonight.
Great. And welcome, Bill Kuzer. So glad you're here.
Thanks, Judith. Glad to be here. Yes, I'm Bill Kuzer, Booth alum from a long time ago and former associate dean at Chicago Booth. I worked there for close on 30 years, running everything from admissions through career services to executive MBA programs. And I've been working with Fortuna now for 4 or 5 years. And it's been great fun. Love working with clients from all over the world.
Great. Well, we're so glad you all are here. It's going to be a terrific opportunity for those of you that have joined us to learn a lot about applying in round two. I think collectively between the four of us, we have about 100 years of experience in admissions. I just was doing the math and I think I might be right. That doesn't make us old, it just makes us seasoned. And we are looking forward to your questions and hearing a little bit more from you all this evening. So if you'll bear with me for just a moment, I'm going to share my slideshow and just tell you a little bit about where we're coming from and what it is that we're hoping to talk about this evening. So welcome once again. We are really going to be talking about how to ace your round two applications to CBS, MIT, Sloan, Kellogg, and Chicago Booth. And certainly really wonderful information going to be available for you this evening. We also, of course, I'll remind you many times that we have the opportunity to have one-on-one consultations with those of us from the admissions and the Fortuna team. Would love to hear from you. We do half-hour sessions with students that might be interested in talking with us more about their application process. And we'll tell you a little bit more later on about how to get involved with that. Once again, really excited to have this fabulous team with us this evening. A lot of admissions experience, real know-how on the ground. And the best part is we love talking with prospective students and we love sharing what we know with those of you that are on the call. So once again, thank you to my awesome colleagues for being with us this evening. These are a couple of the questions just to set the agenda that we're going to be looking for this evening. As you can see, we are going to be talking about, what are each of the schools really looking for? How can you showcase your leadership and community engagement in your application? We're going to be asking about top tips for each of the schools that are going to be represented. We're going to talk about the video component, which every year we spend a lot of time talking to people applying to Kellogg and MIT Sloan about how to manage those video components. And then, of course, anything that you might be thinking about as you gear up for round two, which we know is right around the corner. Hard to believe we just all finished round one and we're already sort of, deep in it with students that are thinking about applying for January. We do want to leave a lot of time at the end for questions, and we welcome those. So I think what I'm going to do is flip it back to my colleagues, and you guys can answer this in any order you would like to. Sahala, maybe I'll start with you and MIT, and then we can just go through. This is going to be a very casual conversation, everybody. So feel free to jump in as you like. We all know each other pretty well at this point. In fact, Michael and I go way back to our days at graduate school.
Back in the 1600s, right?
Back in the 1600s, exactly. When we were not on computers, we were using cuneiform and writing on tablets. Right. Okay, so Sahala, can you talk a little bit about what you feel MIT is looking for in their applicants and in their student body?
Yep, absolutely. So MIT is very unique in that they are looking for true doers. So in a way, they're looking for big thinkers, people that have big ideas, that are thinking strategically. But even more than that, they want to know that the person has the ability, the motivation, the skills to execute on those ideas. It fits perfectly with their motto, which is mens et manus, which translates to mind and hands. Basically, what they're telling you is let your brilliant mind find a solution that your hands can then build and deliver to the world, right? You can learn from that the focus is on entrepreneurship, global leadership, and using technology to solve problems. Basically, they want you to not just focus it on your backyard or on the latest, cool little app that does emojis, but rather target something that really impacts the world.
Thank you so much. And obviously that motto really stuck with you, because I know it's something that you talk about a lot with your students, and how to bring that to the fore within the framework of their application essays and questions. Michael, why don't we turn to you and talk about CBS, then maybe we'll go to Bill for Chicago and come back to you for Kellogg, or Bill and Michael can both do Kellogg because you both have such a great background in those schools. So
You bet.
Michael?
Thanks, Judith. And
Sure.
Sahala, I love the note of bringing in what the school's motto is and sort of what their
Yeah.
mission is and what they stand for, because from that flows a lot of what a candidate needs to know about a school. So in the case of Columbia, at the university level, a big part of their mission focuses on being a global force, a global educator. And that notion of being a global institution is something that's baked right into its mission statement. And you'll see direct evidence of that in the way that Columbia Business School approaches its admissions goals. They pride themselves on being the most diverse, or certainly one of the most diverse top schools on the planet. And it means that they are looking not only for the folks that have what might be deemed more recognizable paths to an MBA, coming out of finance or consulting or healthcare or real estate, but they also will really take chances on folks coming from not-for-profits, education, the arts, the military, and that's a really important part of their identity. The other thing that I would say sets Columbia apart is they pride themselves on being very scrappy. They like to be the smart ones who can also roll up the sleeves and get stuff done, and they're very willing to dig into creating solutions. So a similar vibe to what you described, Sahala, in terms of MIT's mission of we want folks that are not just thinkers, we want doers. But I think that there is a New York element to Columbia in being very no BS, and really just trying to focus on let's get a solution in place, let's get stuff done.
And I think that's I like that scrappy, very straightforward. Michael, as you can see from the skyscrapers in back of you, Columbia has a new campus over the past few years. They had this image and this vision of what it was going to take to make that happen. And I respect that a lot, because I think that people are really attracted to that kind of energy. Like, what can we do in one of the best business cities in the world to do it? Which I find really fascinating. And Bill, I'm going to turn to you for University of Chicago Booth.
Sure. So at Booth, much like what Michael was saying, Booth prides itself on a very diverse class. But one of the things that I think does set Booth apart a little bit is the intellectual and academic legacy of multiple Nobel Prize winners on the faculty. And Booth is very, very proud of that. So they are looking for people that have deep intellectual interests, who are able to express themselves well, who really resonate with the academic side of business schools, as well as all of the other elements that go into schools, whether that's community or extracurriculars or the networking that goes on. So I think, particularly for Booth, applicants need to think very clearly about what Booth stands for, looking very closely at its website where it talks about the Chicago approach. And I think it's one of the few places that's kind of trademarked its approach to education. with the Chicago approach. So understanding that and being able to recognize why that's useful, how that's important to the applicant, and how they can demonstrate not only leadership and involvement and engagement, but all of the other intellectual elements that go into a Chicago booth education. And if we flip over to Kellogg, and Michael can add to this as well, the thing that has always struck me about Kellogg, and that seems to be a hallmark of what they're looking for, are people that are very interested in making connections and being part of a strong community. And certainly I have a daughter who went to Kellogg, graduated a few years ago, and that was certainly her experience. And the vibe that she got as she was going through the application process is, how are you going to fit in? How are you going to interact with our fellow students? Are you going to be a great contributor to this class and the community that we're trying to build?
Such a great characterization, Bill, and couldn't agree more from my experience at Kellogg, where there was such an emphasis placed on a sense of inclusion and a sense of you are part of a community, you are part of a team. And I think it shows up from jump, not only, starting with the program, but even in the way that they communicate with applicants, the way that they connect folks who've been accepted to come to their cell days. It has a very strong team-oriented feel to it. So if that is an attractive piece of it for a candidate, that they're looking to be part of something larger, and how that plays out across different industries and functions, I would strongly encourage you to think about Kellogg.
Thank you. I love this conversation so much because I feel like we've got so much information and knowledge in the three of you. So I'm taking notes, as you can tell, because I like to write things down during these sessions because it's always good for me to know. So leadership and community engagement are obviously hallmarks of most of the schools all of the schools that are on this call. And starting with Bill, can you tell us about community engagement and leadership, and how do you recommend that, either specifically at Chicago or just some general advice about how to show that in your application? Because again, I know that all four of the schools that we're talking about care about those issues. So feel free to share some ideas about that.
So from my standpoint, I think that there are several ways that you can highlight community engagement. And the first one is simply on the resume, and having a section on your resume that talks about the things that you do outside of the office, where you're engaged with community volunteer activities or nonprofit work or whatever it might be. That is the place where it's going to kind of jump to the admissions committee. Another area that I have worked with some clients on is if they have one of their recommenders who has been very involved or knows quite a bit about the community service of the candidate, they can mention it in the recommendation letter. So I have had clients in the past who one of their recommenders was the head of a nonprofit for which this candidate volunteered regularly. But even if it's someone at work, if they know that you spend a lot of time on community activities or engaged in kind of community building within your workplace, the recommendation can add that. And then finally, certainly in the essays themselves, talking about the kinds of things that a candidate does outside of the workplace, how they're engaged in building community in their hometowns, the nonprofit work that they might do. And certainly at Booth, there is the second essay is all about, tell us a little bit about who you are. That's a wonderful way and place to talk about the things that you do outside of work, which may mean personal hobbies and things, but it could also have an element of talking about the community work that you do, the volunteer work that you're engaged in. So those are, again, multiple places where you can talk about those kinds of aspects. And, hopefully the admissions committee will pick up on that if you cover it in all three places.
Michael, I'm going to flip the question a little bit. And this is something that came up in another session that I did. How do you encourage students to look for the leadership that might not be so obvious? I think a lot of our students that are applying are like, well, I don't have any leadership, and you're like, wait, look at what you're doing at work, or look at what, the informal ways that you may be impacting an organization or a community. Can you share a little bit about how you talk about that with your students?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's funny. I'm so glad you asked it, because I was when I was listening, Bill, to your description about looking for, hey, if you've done some not-for-profit stuff, or you've done some things outside of work. And my hope is that many of the candidates that are watching tonight may have had those experiences, but not all do. And that oftentimes presents in some anxiety when they're working with us and saying, like, gosh, I haven't gotten to that point yet. I don't think that there's an expectation that folks have formally adopted leadership roles. If you have, then that's great. But I think that there's other ways to demonstrate that. So let me give you an example. Looking at, Bill mentioned the resume. So let's start there. In your career, have you led initiatives rather than teams? Have you been on a cross-functional team where you led part of a project or all of a project? And what I would say is that many more of the cross-section of folks who are thinking about business schools have led projects. That's leadership. That qualifies. That is just as legitimate as if you led a team. And it says that you've gotten a taste for the interpersonal dynamics, for recognizing how to excel in a resource-constrained environment, how to farm out different responsibilities to people on the team. That's really the meat of what they're looking for. It doesn't mean that you had to have had a leadership title. It means that you needed to have acted in some way, whether it's inside or outside of work, where you are responsible for the contributions of others. So I would encourage you to think broadly about that. And again, if you're looking for examples that maybe aren't so obvious, that'd be a great opportunity to kind of talk through with one of us to be able to help identify perhaps there was something in your work environment that may not be patently obvious, but can be teased out to demonstrate, yes, I've actually taken responsibility for the efforts of others and have shown good results, and that speaks to my potential as a future leader.
Sahala, have you seen that in some of the students that you've worked with, or in what you understand about MIT? I think it's something sometimes that students don't always realize that they have in their back pockets. Has that sort of been a conversation you've had with your students?
Yes, absolutely. And especially with students that come from international backgrounds where the concept of volunteering from a very young age with nonprofits, et cetera, sometimes is less necessarily and not necessarily encouraged at that young an age as it is in the US. This question really surprises them and kind of baffles them. It's like, exactly to your point, Michael, how do I show my leadership? How do I show community building when all I did was try and excel in school? And so some of the ways that I encourage people to think about leadership is to think what it actually means to be a leader, right? And at the core of it, it means that you understand your success is tied to the success of people around you, that you can't just run and do things on your own. You have to work with a team. That means that leaders mentor others. They remove barriers and obstacles for others. They unite people on a personal, motivational level. They make people feel safe and welcomed so that they want to be part of the community. So yes, some stories are, the charismatic guru that managed to get his entire school to join some, I don't know, beach cleaning activity, and it all looks really, really good on the application. But in so many cases, especially with MIT, that attracts the engineering type, that is more introvert, the people that prefer the quiet environments, their leadership comes into play in very subtle ways. For example, one of my candidates really cared about the fact that in his workplace, there were a lot of folks that came as immigrants on a temporary visa. And it pained him to see that they make all the effort to transfer their families. And then just because they cannot extend their work visa, they have to go back, even though they're great and talented and capable, et cetera. He took it upon himself without anybody asking him, on top of his day job, I'll call it, and his family commitments and everything else. That was his passion. He would work with these folks at his work and make sure that one way or the other, they land the next job. He worked with HR. He redefined roles to make sure that this fits whatever the criteria is to help them stay in the country, which in my mind, this is magnificent leadership and community building, right? You really understand the barrier that somebody is going through, and you are putting your heart and soul in harnessing your best skills, his understanding, his brain, his interpersonal connections with HR to remove these barriers and make that community stronger, because then these folks can stay with the company and continue to contribute.
And I like what you said about it's heart and soul, right? Like this is something that this person was really committed to. And it wasn't necessarily that, oh, you are the quote leader of this, or like we're handing you this title, but more something that this candidate felt really passionate about. And I think that that's something, Bill, I don't know if you have something to add. You're nodding.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of broadly speaking, I think a lot of candidates, certainly clients I've worked with, think that the leadership aspects have to come from work and the community building aspects have to come from a volunteer or community service organization. And that's not necessarily true. A lot of leadership happens outside of work in sports clubs or not-for-profits or things like that. And a lot of community building happens within the workplace. And so I've found that I work a lot with clients to kind of figure out, what did you do at work to kind of help build the community within your workplace? How did you bring people together there? Or how did you develop leadership aspects in the sports team that you run on Wednesday nights every week? So there are lots of places where both of those come into play. And I think candidates often have the little blinders on in terms of where it's appropriate to talk about leadership and where it's appropriate to talk about community service. And that's not necessarily true. And one of the things that we can do quite well to help them tease out, where can they talk about it from an unusual perspective, perhaps.
And I think that angle is something that kind of leads me into the next part of the application discussion, which is, sometimes students will look at the application and tick off, like, there's a recommendation, there's my resume, there's the online, there's the essay, there's the short answer, there's the interview, right? What they don't always realize is that there's lots of room in there to tell your story, right? It's not just all going to show up in your essay, and your successes or your challenges are not only going to show up in your resume. But I think what I would love to do, if we can, is to talk about the different elements of the application. And perhaps, Bill, if I could start with you, if you wanted to just choose one piece of the application and talk about, how does that work at Chicago?
Okay.
So if you wanted to tackle one piece or a couple of pieces, just to give a taste.
Sure. So let's start with kind of the thing most people worry about, which is the essay. And Booth has two essays right now. One is basically the standard, why do you want to get an MBA and what's Booth going to do for you? And the second is, tell us a little bit of something outside of work. And for the first essay, the thing that I always tell clients is, whenever it's a why MBA or what are your career goals, is to really have a good solid story about where it is you want to go in your career and have a good rationale for it. So I always say, what's the why behind your career? Not simply, oh, I think it looks like fun, or I can make a lot of money, or all my friends are doing it. But what impact do you want to have? How are you going to change the industry, change your community? How is you being in that role going to make a difference somewhere? And being able to tell that story coherently. So once you've got that down, that's kind of the first part of the why Booth question. And the second is basically, why Booth? And as I said earlier, Booth is very proud of certain elements of its program. And in particular, it's the flexibility of the curriculum. It is the academic prowess, and again, the multiple Nobel Prize winners on its faculty. And third, it is this Chicago approach, a particular aspect of philosophy of education that they have. And so for the Booth essay, it's important for applicants to understand what those elements mean for them, be able to talk about how they resonate with those particular elements, and how that academic prowess, that the data-driven Chicago approach is the way they want to learn. And so those are kind of the two key things that I suggest for Booth applicants who are writing that first essay: getting that why on the career and how it's going to play out, and two, really nailing down why Booth in particular is going to help them achieve their goals.
Can I ask a follow-up question, which is, how do you suggest they really dive into the Booth culture? What is it besides reading what they're going to read on screen, where everybody's good looking and all the faculty is completely accessible all the time?
Right.
How do you suggest that people really find out, like, what's it like to be a student here?
You have to talk to students, right? And many of our clients have friends who've been to most of these schools. They have connections already. If they don't, I usually recommend go on the website, find out who is in charge of the student club that you're most interested in. And oftentimes those emails will be there. Whether, if you're a military veteran, you talk to the Veterans Club. If you're interested in investment banking, you talk to the Investment Banking Club. They're usually quite willing to spend some time chatting with you. And it's a great opportunity to get the inside scoop on what's really going on with the school. Of course, you want to attend the regular webinars and info sessions and visit the school if at all possible. But the opportunity to talk directly one-on-one with students who are there or who have recently graduated really will help solidify the sense of fit and whether this is a great place for you to go to school.
Thank you. And Michael, I don't know if you have any additions to that regarding, how do you get to know CBS, for example? How would you recommend that people do that?
So I'm going to go back to what Sahala so wisely noted at the beginning, which is you get to know what the place stands for, you understand their mission and vision as an institution. Why do they exist? And then you look for direct evidence of that in their application process. So let me start with CBS. When you look at the CBS application, their first two questions aren't measured in the number of words like most essays are. They're measured in the number of characters. What does that tell you? Tells you no bullspit. We don't want fluff. We don't want extraneous.
You're making me laugh. I thought it just meant
wax poetic.
You just want to make the candidates go crazy with counting periods and spaces in between.
There is also that. There is maybe a little bit of masochism there. Yeah. But this is get to the point. The very center of business does not have time for lots of fluff. Get to the point. They give you space in the other essays to express, and they do talk about, we talked about being a global institution. So one of the questions does focus very much on diversity and inclusion and giving specific examples of times where you've demonstrated an element within the inclusion space. So there is a space there to demonstrate, what you've done and to be able to spend a little bit more time doing it. But it tells you something about Columbia as an institution that their first two essays are measured in characters. And so it really does force you, to quote Mark Twain, if I had more time, I'd say less. It means you have to do your work up front. You can get the fuzzy version, but then when you are getting down to the point of, I'm ready to apply, you have to be on point. Within those, one of and this is actually a new question for them, focuses on what you're doing career-wise. And what Bill said before about being targeted.
Yep.
Columbia is looking at not just why you want to be at the school, but they're looking at the post-MBA career. And they want to hear how you're planning on using a space at the school to propel you into this career. And they want to know if it's realistic. So if you say, I was a toll collector and then I was promoted to chief toll collector and now I want to do private equity, it's not going to fly. They need to know that you've researched this and thought this through enough that you can boil it down to a number of characters to tell the story. This is what I want to do career-wise. So you got to be serious on this. So too with Kellogg. So Kellogg, we talked about before, and Bill so eloquently talked about that sense of camaraderie, that sense of interreliance. That's going to be a major feature. That's a big part of the school's culture. And so being able to talk about not only what you're going to get out of the MBA, but what you are going to bring back to the MBA community at Kellogg, arguably that's going to be something that every school is interested in, but Kellogg in particular, hearing what you plan to bring to your small group, to your cluster, to the MBA community, to the Northwestern community, is going to be something that they're keenly tuned in on, because they're looking for citizens of a like mind with that, folks that are all very willing to jump in and support each other and be part of each other's learning and development. So that's something that I think from a thematic standpoint, you want to be clued in on for Kellogg.
And I know we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about the video component, but Sahala, can you talk about the MIT essay cover letter, which is a tough one and one that I think a lot of people are like, why do they want a cover letter? How come I'm not writing an essay? So do you mind sharing a bit about that and some tips or ideas about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I love the way that you're basically explaining to the candidates, start with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you're going to do in your career, not even when you finish the class? And that is exactly the same logic that MIT Sloan would expect to see in a cover letter, that you are a strategic thinker, right? That you see your career 5, 10, and 20 years into the future, right? And you can walk back a plan from that to say, here's where I am now. Here are the questions that I need answered so I can move to the next step. Here's how MIT can help me answer these questions because of this professor, that class, this workshop, that club, right? Once I have answered these questions, I will embark on this journey that will bring me to a global leadership position, solving a big problem. And so the cover letter, in a way, is the candidate's way of telling MIT Sloan why they should allocate a seat for them. What is going to be the return on that investment? And prove it. Prove and prove and prove it. Not just make statements about how you're wonderful and strategic and smart and capable, right? Show them. Show them with the facts, with stories, with numbers, with any sort of proof that you can to say, this is who I am, this is where I need to be, this is why I need your help, and here's the proof that I'm going to be true to my word if you just let me graduate from your institution.
Thank you. I think that's so interesting, and I'm just reflecting on start with the end in mind, which is such a beautiful way, as you said, to think about it as you begin this process. For those of you that are applying in round 2, I'd like to touch briefly on some of the other aspects of the application process. If anybody just wants to jump in and talk briefly about a resume. I know, you can make it school specific or general, that's fine, but would love to hear a little bit of ideas from you about how to manage that resume. Sahala, do you want to jump in with that?
Oh, I'm on the roll, so I'll continue. So, so what I like about the resume, it is structured in a way that is, again, heavily focused on the doing part, right? So they want to see what you have done as proof. And why I like it so much is because it's actually perfect preparation for your professional work. So for any of the students, if you have not had the opportunity to write a professional resume, the MIT way of asking you to talk about your career is exactly the way you want to be comfortable speaking when you go to your next job interview. And why is that? Because so many people, when they're asked, okay, describe this position that you've had, right? They will start with talking about, so as a project manager, I was responsible for project coordination between members, and I was assigning the budget, and I was responsible to keep the project on time, right? All the wrong ways. Because then you're talking about what you're responsible for. Right. You're not talking about the results that you had. You are not talking about the numbers, right? What does that mean you're responsible for a budget? Was that $100 or $100 million, right? And you're not talking about the business impact that your contribution had to the company, right? How did the two tie, right? So if you're a project manager, you want to say something along the lines of, I led a team of 7 engineers. I completed a critical project on time and at 70% of the budget. The budget contributed to the company's ability to launch a new product earlier, generating $2 million in revenue. That shows them a couple of things. First of all, that you know what you're doing and how that contributed, which means you are thinking about your role within the company in a big strategic way. Right. And it shows them proof that you actually didn't just get a role and did it poorly. You did it above and beyond expectations. So it's a great way, the MIT Sloan resume is a great way to really dive deep inside, and it creates a lot of anxiety because it's really hard for people, especially earlier in the career, to understand how did the fact that they built this feature, how does that translate to dollars at the end of the day? But that's exactly the leap that a consultant can help you make so that it sounds credible in the overall story of your career aspirations.
Michael, do you want to talk about, I know we could all talk about resumes, but Michael, I'm going to move to recommendation letters. If you don't mind, just a couple of general words, or so Columbia or Kellogg's specificity, up to you.
Sure. Not a problem. So in general, when you look at where recommendations have gone in the last few years, in many cases, they've gone from 2 to 1. They've gone from multiple recommendations being sought by the schools to 1. What does that tell our candidates? It tells the candidates that, first off, these schools have a lot of reading to do. They don't have the bandwidth to read multiple accounts of how you resplit the atom and recreated sliced white bread and walk on water. It also tells you, though, that there is an expectation that the recommendation is going to be positive. There shouldn't be any doubt. And they don't need the redundancy of a second one that's going to say basically the same thing. So it means that you got to choose your recommender wisely. In most cases, there is a preference, but not an exclusive preference, for the recommendation to come from somebody who has directly supervised you. Why? Because they want someone who can speak directly to the quality of your work product and to your potential future leadership and any development areas that you can focus on in order to really be better. And by the way, that might be well served by going to an MBA program. So it doesn't have to be somebody who is your direct supervisor. And for some candidates, it's a little dicey. Maybe their supervisor hasn't been their supervisor long enough. Maybe they don't have the greatest relationship with their supervisor and they want to go to somebody else. That's okay. But your criteria for picking your recommender has to be, is it somebody that can speak directly to the quality of my work product? And is it somebody that can speak to my future potential in leadership? That's also going to be some work on your part as candidates. Part of what we do as coaches is we help you to help prepare your recommender, if they would like that help, so that they know how their recommendation is being read by an admissions committee. There are pretty specific criteria in most cases that the schools will put forth. Sometimes it's a grid where they say, we want you to rank the candidate compared with their peers on a bunch of different criteria. Sometimes it's more narrative driven, but they're saying, we want to hear how the person stacks up against their peers, or how have you seen them compared with folks over the past X number of years? So we can help, if there's ever a question, we can help to guide the recommender's understanding and to work with you and them so that they understand what they're saying and how it potentially impacts your candidacy.
And I think that that's important. And possibly one of the hardest things you're going to do as a candidate is talk to your recommenders. You're managing up, you're asking a favor. You kind of want to give a lot of advice, but you're not writing it for them. How do you do this? These are people that supervise you. So although candidates say to me all the time, the essay is really hard, but the recommendation letter is like teaching me something about how to manage and how to lead. And so I take that with a lot of, when I hear that, I nod a lot because I find it very much to be true. Bill, I wanted to turn to you, the spaces in between. The application online, all those things that should not be left till the night before, essentially. Can you speak about the online application for Booth, and then maybe some general tips about how one could approach the online application?
Well, I love your comment about don't leave it to the night before. Can't tell you how many clients have come to me, a day before and said, "Oh, how do I do this?" And so one of the things that you'll find as you look at anybody's online application, Booth's included, is there are often what I'll call hidden essays. So it's not the full essay, but there's a 250-word, tell me about your career goal, or tell me something that I didn't know already about your candidacy. And you want to craft those in the same way you would your big essay or the cover letter in the case of MIT. So I always recommend that clients open up that online application as soon as they think that they want to apply to a school and begin to go through the entire thing so they understand all of the pieces that they're going to be asked, and highlight any of those little hidden essays, anything that's more than just name, address, here's where I worked. anything where you have to describe what your role was, anytime you have to talk about why you left one employer to move to another, anytime you're talking about your career goals, all of those things have to be crafted well. And so clients really need to understand what's there. They need to begin working on those as soon as they're comfortable with the main essays, and hopefully that's with several weeks ahead of the deadline for applying to the school. And Booth's, like most others, is pretty straightforward, but there are these little hidden essay things, particularly around career goals and where you want to go and why, both short-term and long-term. And again, for those, I recommend talk about the why. Why are those important for you? Why are those important for what impact do you want to have? Why are those important for the community or the industry that you're going to be working in? And being able to explain what role you want to take and kind of what problems you want to solve.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, which is, should you be repeating things that you say other places in your application? Or should it be, go ahead.
Yeah, in some cases you have to. So if it's career goals and your why Booth essay is going to talk about your career goals. So yes, you're going to have to, if one of these short answer questions is what are your career goals, you are going to repeat the same thing. Hopefully you can rephrase it a little bit. And maybe make it more concise because you don't have as much space. So some cases, yes, you're going to repeat things because you want them to be consistent. You don't want to say on the one hand, oh, I want to be a consultant, and the other hand, I want to be in private equity.
Okay.
Somebody's going to see that and say, well, they really haven't figured out why they want to get this MBA and where they're going to go with it. So they're confused, and you certainly don't want the admissions committee to think that you're confused.
Can I jump in and play
please,
bad cop for a second?
By all means.
So Bill was talking so eloquently about the positives and sort of how you want to start well ahead of time and thinking about how you want to craft things and so forth. I'm going to get real negative for about 30 seconds. Don't lie. Don't lie on your application. Admissions committees retain firms who, if you are admitted, are going to confirm certain parts of your application. They are going to confirm your beginning and end dates of employment, for example. They're going to confirm that you attended and graduated from the schools that you sent transcripts for. They're going to confirm things, if they can, like starting and ending salaries and bonuses and so forth. If you lie because you're, oh, well, I just don't think that my bonus looks good enough and they're not going to be impressed and so forth. People have been tossed for those things. Don't lie. They're not worrying about whether or not you had a strong enough bonus or a good enough year or whatever. They're looking to see if you're a positive candidate with leadership potential who can contribute to their communities. That's what they're worried about. Fudging titles and numbers and so forth is not worth it. So just tell the truth on that stuff. Run it by your admissions coach to make sure that everything is buttoned up before you send it in. But for heaven's sake, please tell the truth.
It sounds like you have experience with this.
No. It's never happened before.
Sahala, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, I think I love how we're joking about the candidates that come last minute, but I actually had a couple of candidates that were asking questions a year before their cycle, and their question was, should I start thinking about things now? Should I start working on my essays now? And my answer is always absolutely yes. At the very minimum, you want to understand exactly what the essays are about. What is the school expecting you to convey? And then you have the very rare opportunity, because it's very few candidates that have that forward vision to start this process more than a year in advance. So you as a candidate, if you start more than a year in advance, you have the opportunity to actually impact your history, because by the time you filled the application, you will have had a year of, for example, volunteering opportunities. You can go to your boss and say, hey, I would like to try and lead this project. Would you give me an opportunity? You suddenly find yourself challenging yourself because you are actually testing and preparing for that moment that you will write in the application, your community building, your leadership achievements, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely, start thinking about it as soon as possible. hopefully hire a coach earlier rather than later, because a coach will help you really translate not just what the text says, but what are the intentions behind the words, just like Michael described, right? They ask about the bonus, but what they really want to understand is X, Y, and Z.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. And certainly for those of you that are on the call, thinking about round two, you've got plenty of time. I know we're talking about like, and many of you will have looked at the essay questions before or opened an application. But if you get off the call tonight and you're excited about what we're talking about, feel free to reach out to us for a consultation or open up an application and see what you think. It's the unknown is quite scary. And then when you look at it, you're like, oh, I understand this. I'm eager. I'm excited to get involved. I want to remind everybody, please feel free to post questions. We would love to hear from you. I'm going to turn our attention to the video questions at both Kellogg and MIT. So if the Kellogg team wants to talk a little bit about those rapid fire questions, that would be great, Bill and Michael. And then I'll turn it over to Sahala for the MIT portion.
I'll jump in.
Yes, please.
So the one thing I always think about when we're talking about these video questions is I'm so glad they didn't have these when I was applying to business school. I would one, not have done well, and two, it would have freaked me out, and I would have stressed about this for weeks on end. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for clients, is to try to stay as relaxed as possible when you go through them. So Kellogg's basically got just a couple of questions, 3 questions you're going to be asked as part of the Kellogg application. Once you've submitted, you're going to get a note back saying you have 96 hours in which to submit your answers to 3 video questions. One of them, the first one, is pretty standard. Almost everybody gets it. The other 2 can be a variety of things. And the first one is along the lines of, tell us something we wouldn't otherwise know about you, something that's not clear from your resume. And the other 2 tend to be a little more behavioral. Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a team. Perhaps tell me why Kellogg is the school for you. Perhaps tell me about how you kind of created a culture of inclusion at your workplace or volunteer place of volunteer work. And you get basically a minute to respond to those. Kellogg offers opportunities to practice, which we would very much encourage you to do. So there are a couple of things to think about. One is just kind of the basic logistics of camera setup, background, what you're going to wear. You don't want to look sloppy. You don't need to wear a tuxedo. So kind of what is your normal work attire is probably what we'd recommend. You want a plain background. You want good lighting. All of those kinds of things are important. When it comes to the actual response, you want to think through ahead of time, what are the things I'm likely to be asked about? And do I have an example that I can use? Much like you would preparing for an in-person interview. So what are some examples of behavioral questions I might be asked? So teamwork-oriented questions, leadership-oriented questions, community building, diversity-oriented questions, particularly for a place like Kellogg. And what would I say about those if I'm asked about those? And have a couple of bullet points for each of those that you can refer to. And then for the something you might not know about me on the resume, that's something you have a little more control over. So what would you like to explain? And you have an opportunity there to really highlight something about you. So it's, in general, I would think, beyond work, beyond perhaps your volunteer activities, but something that's just kind of makes you an interesting person that would be fun to have in class and demonstrates how you are going to contribute something, whether it's sports, whether it's theater, whether it's music, whether it's you're a great cook. Those kinds of things just round out who you are and give the admissions committee a different perspective on what you bring to the table. The final thing I'd like to say is that for Kellogg in particular, a lot of this, what they're looking for is, one, are you personable? Are you the kind of person that we would like to have in our program? And can you communicate reasonably well in kind of a fairly high pressure environment? So it's not so much about what you say, although that will be nice, but as much as how you come across and what your personality is. And you come across as confident, do you come across as personable? And again, as I said, someone who we would like to have in our class.
Michael, do those questions come rapid fire? Can you remind me, is it like You see a question, you answer. You see a question, you answer.
If I remember correctly, yes, they do come. So you have that prep period, but then it's meant to kind of simulate if they were in person with you. So the thought is that you're going to roll from one to the next. And I want to highlight, Bill, you did such a great job of kind of running through. There was one piece that I wanted to pull out in particular, is you mentioned, hey, you want to jot down a few bullet points. That I couldn't agree more. That's exactly how I would prepare for this, is you think about those categories that Bill mentioned of, leadership, diversity, being part of a team and contributing to a community, some things that people wouldn't otherwise know about you. And you're going to just put a couple of bullet points together. You don't want to be scripted, because there is oftentimes, due to anxiety, there is a tendency to want to control and to get exactly every word down. And the entire point of this exercise is to see, as Bill said, how you do under pressure, but it's also to get a sense of your personality. That's going to be muted if you are trying to stick to a script. So bullet points and no more, where you're just using those bullets to remind you, oh, right. And these are your stories. So you're not going to forget what was important to say about it. It will come across, but bullet points and no more. You don't want to script these.
And Sahala, we have some ideas for MIT, and the way that their video question is a little bit different, because you actually know the question beforehand, and it's not really rapid fire, but it is a minute. So can you give us some pointers on that one?
Yeah, and I love the way MIT structured their question, because I think it's so clever. So the instruction they give you is basically record a video as if you're introducing yourself to the class, right? The class will actually not get to see this, and they're very upfront about it. This only goes to the admission office, but it creates your state of mind in terms of, this is what I need to do, and now how do I want to pitch myself, right? Which is almost like if you were an entrepreneur pitching your company, what are the things that you want to highlight? How do you want to grab people's attention? What do you want to say is at the core and the heart of what it is that you bring to the table? And sometimes people struggle with, what do I talk about? It's like, I do a lot of things. And I always say, pick a place, pick an item, a person, a photo, a hobby, right? Just pick something and then talk about that. But again, with the end in mind, think about, what does this item, let's say, represents? How does that tie to what the school is looking for, right? And how are you going to wrap that story in a minute? So I can give you, and it doesn't have to be elaborate, right? The beauty of it, sometimes a minute is actually more than plenty. One of the most
Sometimes a minute can feel really long.
Oh yeah. When you're under a camera, definitely.
Yeah.
But one of the candidates, and I just want to share an example that I absolutely loved, of a candidate that brought a fruit that is native to his country. And that fruit is a symbol of energy, because it's very energizing when you eat it. And he just showed people the fruit, and he explained, this is the fruit, this is what it does, and this is what I am going to be for you. I am going to be the energy. I am going to be the power when days are tough. Can't wait to see you. And you could just see in his tone, in his energy and everything, it's like his words and his item and his story just matched perfectly.
Thank you. These are great, great examples. And it's so interesting for me to hear them, right? I get to meet a lot of the candidates that we talk to. I don't get to meet everybody, but it's really interesting for me to hear about some of the tips and ways that you're working with your students. We don't have a lot of time left, but if anybody on the call would like to give some round 2 tips, things that you have noticed candidates thinking about or you want to advise on, we would love to hear them. Besides, start now.
That'd certainly be number one, Judith.
Okay.
I mean, it seems like round 2 deadlines are far into the distance, but they're really not. If you think about all of the materials that you have to go through, and the introspection and reflection that we would certainly suggest as coaches. I think a lot of candidates don't realize up front how much soul searching and really reflection they need to do to be successful and to prepare a good application. And that takes time.
Michael, anything you'd like to add?
I think focusing in particular on, so oftentimes when I work with a client, I will start by doing some self-assessment exercises with them. And
Mhm.
some of that is because I have the background in careers, but the bigger part of it is it's really going to help to inform what's unique about me. And particularly with second rounds, where that tends to be sort of a bigger round than the others, being able to specifically articulate what is different about you can really be a difference maker in your application. So it is something that, in addition to starting early, identifying and being able to articulate what makes you different, unique, why folks would want you on a team, why you would want to be in a given environment, I think is really important to pinpoint at this point.
Thank you. And Sahala, do you have ideas, things that you're thinking about?
One thing I would say is many times people count on the fact that there are holidays, right? And they
Mhm.
are like, oh, yeah, we'll do that later. So they don't even use the whole time that they have until
Right.
then. And then the holidays come around and suddenly, the flight didn't arrive on time, or you actually do want to spend time with your cousin that you thought you can get without, or whatever that is. And suddenly the unexpected happens and you're left without time. So I can't stress it enough. This requires time, and just try and start as early as possible. I do want to say one more thing, right? Because
Please,
I
yeah.
like it's almost scary. I'm thinking, if I'm the candidate sitting on the other end of our discussion, kind of thinking, oh my God, this is complicated, this is big, I need to start early. The one thing that I want to tell you, it is an uplifting process. And I think a lot of candidates don't appreciate that going into it. But if you think about it, you're going through a makeover of sorts, right? Somebody is looking at your features and is saying, this is what we want to highlight. And then they match you with the perfect clothing and the perfect makeup, and they cut, what's not relevant, and give you a haircut, right? And you come out of it just feeling like $1,000,000. So I would recommend that to anybody, regardless of whether you're going for an MBA program. I think it's such a great exercise for your career, for
Yeah,
your self-esteem,
it's
everything.
true.
So
I'm totally going to go watch episodes of Queer Eye now. You
I
have
know.
sold
It's like, I
motivated me.
want the makeover.
That's right.
100%. I'm in. I'm in.
Jonathan, tell me what to do with my hair, damn it.
exactly.
In my kitchen. I wanted to thank our panelists tonight. It's been so much fun to be with you, as always. A real delight. And I'm going to just share my screen one more time and encourage everyone to reach out to us. We are Fortuna. We have this incredible group of individuals, many of whom you've gotten to meet tonight. You can sign up for a free consultation. As I mentioned, we have been told that we're probably one of the best in the biz at a great free half-hour consultation about your candidacy, the schools you might want to be thinking about, making a good coach fit for you, including some of our wonderful team members that you met this evening. And we're really, really looking forward to hearing from you in the future. For those of you that have friends that weren't able to join tonight, this is recorded and it is going to be available on YouTube for sure. So once again, really excited to be in touch with you and see how we can work with you going forward to help your round 2 dreams, or perhaps round 1 next year, come true. Thanks again to Sahala, to Michael, and to Bill. Wonderful to be with you. And we look forward to being in touch with everybody very soon. Take care and good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.